we're about to unpack one of history's biggest, most fascinating paradoxes: how the very thing that builds a civilization can also become the architect of its downfall. It's a wild question when you think about it, isn't it? How does the ultimate social glue, the very thing that binds everyone and everything together, suddenly turn into a cage that suffocates progress and causes the whole structure to just break? Let's get into it.
So, first things first, we gotta get one thing straight. Back in the early medieval world, building a state on religious faith, well, it wasn't backward, not at all. In fact, in a world that was pretty much pure chaos, it was an incredibly smart, super effective way to create some kind of order. I mean, just put yourself in their shoes for a second. Most people can't read, there's no science to speak of, so what's your rulebook? How do you explain anything? Well, God's will became that universal framework. It was the common language everyone understood. It's how you justified who was in charge, where the laws came from. It gave everyone a place and a purpose in the grand scheme of things.
And the logic here is actually pretty brilliant. Check it out. If God's will is absolute, right, then the king he supposedly chose has to be the legitimate ruler. And if that king rules by divine right, then his laws are basically God's commands. When everyone buys into this, you get this incredibly stable society. Why? Because challenging the king isn't just treason, it's challenging God himself. And for a while, man, that system worked perfectly.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Here's where it all starts to go wrong. The system's biggest strength, that absolute, you can't question it authority, was also its fatal flaw. The church had a total monopoly on truth. It was the only gatekeeper. And that monopoly started to suffocate any chance for society to change or adapt. And this is where you see the real clash. Look at these two ways of thinking. On one hand, you've got the dogmatic way. Truth just gets handed down from on high, from the church. If you disagree, you're not having a debate. You're a heretic. If you ask questions, you're not learning, you're sinning. Now, compare that to how we try to think today. We test ideas, we argue about them. Questioning is how we make progress. That old dogmatic structure, it had no way to fix itself. It was designed to not self-correct. And that right there explains why heresy was such a huge deal, why it was treated so brutally. This wasn't just some friendly disagreement. No way. In a society that's held together by this one single divine truth, a heretic is like a virus threatening the entire system. Things like the Inquisition, they weren't just random acts of cruelty. They were the totally logical endpoint for a system that, by its very nature, cannot allow itself to be questioned. Period. So yeah, this super rigid system worked. Until it just didn't. Sooner or later, the real world started throwing curveballs that the official story just couldn't handle. And by the time we get to the late Middle Ages, you've got this huge crack opening up between what the church was saying and what people were seeing with their own two eyes. And it wasn't just one thing, it was a crisis coming from all sides. You had the plague, right? It killed everybody. The good, the bad, the devout, the sinner. People started asking, hey, where's that divine protection we were promised? Then you had the Crusades. These holy wars that were supposed to have God's blessing, they just kept failing. And on top of all that, you could literally see bishops and cardinals living like kings, dripping in wealth. That didn't quite line up with all the talk about piety, you know? Reality was just shattering the official narrative. So what's an institution to do? Adapt? Change its mind? Nope. It doubled down hard. Instead of changing the story to fit the facts, they tried to twist the facts to fit the story. Oh, the plague. That's just a test from God. Those military defeats, well, that's because your faith wasn't strong enough. You can imagine how well that went over. It just made people trust them even less. And then came the knockout punches. A few game-changing technologies and ideas pop up that just completely, utterly shatter the church's monopoly on truth. Forever. It was really the perfect storm. First, you get the printing press. Suddenly, the church can't control who gets a Bible and, more importantly, what they think it means. Then comes humanism, bringing back all these old-school Greek and Roman ideas about using reason and celebrating human potential. And the final piece? The Reformation. It basically says you don't need a priest to talk to God. You can have a direct line. And just like that, the whole game changed. The question wasn't what is true anymore. It was, wait a minute, who gets to decide what's true? Now here's a super important point. All of this didn't actually destroy religion. Not at all. It just transformed it. Faith stopped being the operating system for the entire country and became something deeply personal. An individual choice.
And you could even argue that separating church and state is what saved religion, by freeing it from the impossible job of trying to govern a complex, messy world. Okay, so a medieval history lesson. Why should you care? Why does any of this matter today? Because this pattern, a system of belief rising up, creating order, and then becoming so rigid it shatters, that's not just about religion. We see echoes of this exact same cycle playing out all around us in totally secular ideologies. Ever hear someone say something like this? That is a direct echo of that old dogmatic thinking. It's this idea that some belief, political, social, whatever, is just so self-evidently true that to even ask questions about it makes you a bad person. Or how about this one? This kind of black and white thinking? It's the exact same mental trick that was used to label people heretics. It just wipes out any middle ground, any nuance. It turns a simple disagreement into this epic battle between pure good and absolute evil.
And oh, this one is a classic. This is the get-out-of-jail-free card for any holy cause, whether it's religious or not. It's the belief that your mission is so noble and so important that you get to break the rules that the rest of us have to follow.
Which brings us to the absolute core of it all, the big takeaway. Look, believing in something strongly, that's not the problem. Not at all. The danger kicks in the second an idea becomes so sacred, so untouchable, that you're not allowed to question it, or criticize it, or even just doubt it a little. That's the exact moment an ideology stops being a helpful tool and turns into a prison for your mind. So I'm going to leave you with this to think about. What this whole story teaches us is that any system, any belief that claims to be perfect and unquestionable is eventually going to crash and burn against the hard shores of reality. So the real question for us is, what are the absolute truths we refuse to question today? What are the sacred dogmas of our time? History is practically screaming at us to figure that out.